Well, this is it. We did it. We are so excited about the privilege that you've given us, so grateful for the privilege you've given us to be with you again this year. It's been a remarkable conference. We hope you feel fed. We hope you feel nourished. We hope you feel supported. And I'm grateful also for the opportunity to share one last big idea. One of the things that's been remarkable to me this year is how many line leaders there have been, executives, and many of us here are professional trainers, organization development experts, but I've been grateful that there have been so many that recognize that this is a place for leaders in general. I want to ask you, if you would, for just a moment, if you consider yourself a teacher, to stand up. Stand for just a moment. If you consider yourself a teacher, then I'm going to ask you to go to a place with me for a moment, a place that all of us know. So all of us who are teachers know that the moment we live for, the moment that we prepare, plan, and live for, is a moment when all conditions are perfect. And we're no longer just communicating with people, we're in a state of communion. And it's that moment of intense connection and intimacy when lives change. Have you felt that before? Have you been in that place? I ask you to go to that place for a moment, and I want you to put words to it. So find somebody not adjacent to you at your table, pair with them. I want 2 or 3 adjectives that describe that moment. Go, 30 seconds. Just quick adjectives, single words. Describe the feeling. All right, good. Okay, go ahead and grab a seat. Thank you. I want you to anchor that spot. I've had that feeling multiple times in the past couple of days. One of my experiences this year was in this place. So in the month of May, I was in Singapore, and I was standing in an auditorium with some of the general officers of the Singaporean military teaching influencer. And they were sitting there with their faces open, their notebooks open, their posture open, absorbing and attending. And I felt so incredibly joyful. Have you felt that before? What I've been thinking about and what I'd like to share is how we can create more of those moments of what I call magnificent vulnerability. Moments when people give us the privilege, the terrifying privilege of influencing them. If you haven't felt that terror, then we haven't properly thought about those moments when people are sitting there and they're open to us, they give us access to them. As I've tried to define these moments, 4 words came up for me. The first is, there's a moment where you're no longer standing on the stage. It feels like you're down there with, and you've connected, that you're part of a community that's spontaneously formed, and it's a peer community. Have you felt that before? Second, it's a moment where I feel connected to meaning, that I'm part of something bigger than myself, something elevating, something exalting, something that will lift and serve. Third, I feel in these moments like it's not just about me, it's about truth. There are these moments of just intense, absolute certainty about what I need to say and what people need to hear. And what a privilege, what an audacious thing to be able to experience, being part of that with people, connecting them with an idea that's precisely what they need in that moment. And finally, there are moments where what I experience from others is complete vulnerability, where you look out and you see these open faces, these open eyes, these attentive people, and it's absolutely spectacular. And it happens far too seldom. I mean, we've all had that, but we want it much, much more often. So I invite you to join me to contemplate what are the conditions that create this possibility, this moment where they're completely open, where they're engaged, where they're soaring with us, and where lives are changing. I learned about one of these kinds of moments just recently. my partner, Al, was in Toronto, and he met a woman by the name of Barbara McKay. Barbara is one of us. She's a trainer. So she's been training Crucial Conversations, and she said, thank you for it, and I'm so grateful for what it's done for my life, and what a gratifying thing it is to hear that. But she said, more important than the impact on me, I want to tell you about what it's done for my mother, for Sylvia. She said, my mom is 85, and she's been a curmudgeon her entire life. A little difficult to get along with, and 85 didn't add to that. So we decided as a group, somewhat persuasive with her, that it was time for her to go to assisted living facility. And she went, and as we dropped her off there, I felt some trepidation about the experience ahead for her in her life. She said a few months later, as I was back visiting her, I noticed a copy of Crucial Conversations sitting on her nightstand. She said, I was amazed. I asked my mother about this, she reported, and she said, when I arrived here, I looked around and I realized there were a lot of people here who were lonely because they were jerks. She said, and I started to pay attention to some of the jerk things they did, and that got me thinking, I'm kind of lonely too. And I don't want to spend the rest of my life lonely, the last phase of my life. So I bought the book. Now imagine the moment. Imagine the moment when Sylvia McKay is sitting there and she cracks open the binding on Crucial Conversations for the first time. That moment of complete vulnerability. That moment of openness and hopefulness, aspiration and need. And that's who you and I have the chance to connect with. In that moment, what do you and I have to do to ensure that there's a possibility that this will create a transforming experience for her, that it could be life-changing? Now, I don't know about you, but I have some favorite videos. Anyone remember this one? Yeah. So this for me, there's one moment in one of our videos more than any other that I just connect with emotionally. If you'll remember this from the previous version of the training, this is where Jackie's just gotten a quote-unquote gift certificate from her boss, from Scott. And it turns out it's actually a work assignment. She has to take a client to dinner. And that isn't the point. I don't even want you to watch Jackie in this one. I want you to watch Scott. There's a moment that's so completely disarming to me. And I want you to watch his face and see if you can pick up the same feeling that I tend to.
All right, let's tackle these things one at a time. First, I'd like for us to find a way to work together honestly, without games. I'd like both of us to be comfortable about how we establish plans.
I don't know what to say.
That's the moment. Do you see his face? For the boss, the person with power to say, I don't know what to say. There's that moment of vulnerability, that moment of openness, that moment where he's saying, I invite you to influence me. And that's the gift that our participants give us all the time. So here's Sylvia opening the book for the first time. And at 85 years old, she takes the style under stress test. She said, I found that I scored really high on silence and sarcasm. Go figure, right? She said, I discovered that I scored high on those, so I began reading about solutions. And I decided perhaps talking tentatively would work better than what I'd done in the past. Perhaps building rather than immediately disagreeing would make sense. And so she began working on these skills. And as Barbara visited with her, she said, I have friends for the first time in my life. I have people who want to spend their life with me. So the question for us to consider is, how do we prepare for those moments where this vulnerable person comes and we have the opportunity to influence them? You know, can we command more of those moments into existence? I think not. One of my favorite sayings that I didn't share earlier in the author panel came from this guy. During some of the darkest days of the Revolutionary War in the United States, when spirits were low and hopes were bleak, George Washington liked to quote from a play that was popular at the time. There was a character named Cato. And in the play, somebody asked Cato, what are the odds of success here? Are we likely to succeed? Can we guarantee it? To which he responds, 'tis not in mortals to command success. And then the line. The line is, but we'll do more. We'll deserve it. So my question for us is not how can we command or create these experiences, but how can we deserve them? How can we deserve these moments of magnificent vulnerability where people give us the terrible responsibility to influence them? I believe there are three things that I've noticed in myself that always explain my failure to experience those moments. I can trace back long, dry periods where I haven't had those magnificent experiences as consistently to failure in one of these three. The first is a failure to pay the price in skill. The question I reflect on regularly is this: am I reading, studying, and continuously improving? Am I continuously in a state of not self-criticism, but creative dissatisfaction with my craft? Or am I phoning it in? Do I have the slides figured out? Are the stories all nailed? Do I know how to tell them? Giving this speech today for me was terrifying because I don't have this one figured out. This is a one-off. And it gives me the opportunity to open myself, to prepare, and to connect with you in a unique way. Interesting for me as well, maybe your life has been different, but for me, the most important skills and knowledge that I've acquired have not been things that I've sought, but things that have sought me. Has that happened to you? I've had books come to me. I've had people come to me. I've had stories come to me. And the question that I've asked myself is, have I responded to them? My guess is in the last 2 days, you've had things come to you, people and stories and books, and you've had an impression, you've had a feeling, this is important to me, and if not now, will be. I believe those moments of magnificent vulnerability happen more consistently to the degree we respond to the things that come to us. That somehow we're being prepared for those opportunities to serve that will come along shortly. So I encourage us to consider, what have you had brought to you at this conference? What's presented itself to you? What books are on your table that you know you should have read? And I feel impressed to promise that if you diligently prepare, if you're creatively dissatisfied and you pay the price in preparation, you'll find remarkable ways that those will be available to you precisely when you need them. Second, selflessness. Now, I'm not going to mean this in the way we often think. Ron talked a little bit yesterday about how sometimes we can be caught in a motive to bless rather than, or to impress rather than to bless. I haven't struggled with that for a few years. I'm okay with that. I don't feel a need to impress so much, but I have a different one that gets me self-focused. It's this. I find that my own shame and feeling of vulnerability often draws my energy away from the group, away from those I'm trying to serve. I find that when this is happening to me, I'm over-preparing in some ways, or I'm obsessing about the introduction, or I'm using the old stuff that's the sure stuff. If I find that I'm doing that, I notice that my challenge is that I've turned inward rather than outward. It's not about them, it's about me now. That fear is driving me to disconnect from the group and try to obsess about the material. If I want more moments of magnificent vulnerability, if I want to deserve them, what I can do is cue myself. Just notice when that's happening. When I'm worried about running out of material, when I'm worried about somebody being smarter than me in the room, when I'm worried they're going to discover finally that I'm a fraud, that I'm not who I wish they thought I was, when that's my focus, learning to surrender that. And the way to surrender that is just to try to connect with the group, to figure out who they are, to learn about them, to understand their needs. You never make the shame and fear go away. All you can do is eclipse it and transcend it. You transcend it by connecting with the purpose of the people in the group. And finally, the final thing for me that I know helps create those moments, and when I lack this, I find that I inoculate myself against having more of those moments, is my capacity for vulnerability. You see, your vulnerability creates the safety others need so that they can be vulnerable. When their faces are open and their notebooks are open and their posture is open, it's always because they feel safe with you. And the question is, how do we express that vulnerability that offers them that safety? One cue I've noticed is my body language. When I'm not vulnerable, I notice it in my body. When I'm standing backstage or before I start a class, I can tell by the cues my body is giving me whether I'm closed up and fearful or whether I'm willing to be transparent and authentic and present with the group. You see this in people when they're defensive and together. Our challenge is to find a way to get out of that, to get to that vulnerable place, to be able to open ourselves. You see this in all great leaders that know how to connect with a group. Just watch the body language.
We will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men,
look at the
Jews
body,
and
look at the
Gentiles,
face, look at the
Protestants
posture.
and Catholics will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
You see it? Do you see the body language? You see the openness. You see he's there. He's there for a purpose. He's there about truth. He's there about others. He is incredibly vulnerable. The question I invite us to consider is this: am I vulnerable to the material I'm trying to teach? Am I striving to live at the limit of my knowledge? Do I see my own brokenness in relationship to this topic, whatever it is I'm teaching? Do I share my own unfinished journey in appropriate ways with others as well? And am I okay with that? To the degree we can examine our own brokenness and get comfortable with that, we can be vulnerable and open with others as well. And it invites them to feel safe with us because we feel safe with ourselves. So there it is. If we want more of those moments, I believe the questions we need to ask is, are we worthy for those moments? Do we deserve those moments in the preparation we're giving from a skill perspective? Are we noticing cues that we're turning inward and obsessing about the arguments and facts and looking good? Or are we selfless? And have we paid the price to open ourselves to examine and embrace our own brokenness so that we can be vulnerable with others? And why do we do this? Because we want to connect. This is Serena Smith. She was taught by probably somebody in this room. Serena Smith took a Crucial Conversations class about a year ago in the UK. And she came open. She came vulnerable. She wanted help. She was curious about how to be more effective in her work, but she had no idea how consequential that training would be. She writes to me, "Crucial Conversations literally saved my life. I had my training a year ago and had lots of practice in the workplace, so I understand the theories well. A few months ago, I was attacked by an acquaintance of mine with a knife. She says, at the time I was being held by my throat at knife point, I was still able to think clearly." Can you imagine that? And part of the reason she reports being able to think clearly is because what she learned in the class. She continues, "I knew I needed to create safety. So I was careful not to be silent or violent. I knew he wanted to rape me, but I just kept asking him to put the knife down. And I probed to find out what he was upset about. I said, listen to me. I just want to understand you. Listen to me. I just want to understand you. Listen to me. I just want to understand you." After the third expression, he put the knife down and said, "All right, let's talk." They spoke for 2 hours, after which he surrendered to the police. He's now in prison, and she's safe. When people arrive in our classrooms, they want to be vulnerable. They want to be taught. They surrender to us the opportunity to influence them if we're prepared, if we've paid the price. My question to you is also, have you experienced that from VitalSmarts? What I hope you've gotten in the last 2 days is that we try to pay the price in skill. We try to ensure that our motives are selfless, that we're here about you. We hope that you've experienced our vulnerability as well. In fact, if you'd stand one last time, I'd like you to join me in a pose. So here it is. Open it wide. Now, as you hold that pose, hold it for a second, no matter how vulnerable it feels, no matter how difficult and uncomfortable it is. I'd ask you to hold the pose for just a minute, because while what we've hoped for from REACH is that you would feel educated and enlightened and supported, the primary motive that we operate from at VitalSmarts is love. We hope you felt loved. We hope you understand that first and foremost, we want to bless your lives. We hope the last 2 days have done that. We hope to see you again next year. Go change the world. Thank you.